welcome to the second episode of 0K, podcast where we hit the highlights from the Urbit extended universe and interview some of the unique specimens that are building this operating system Urbit, which is the decentralized operating system for the next 500 years. We got some feedback from the last episode, namely that it was too powerful. And by powerful, of course, I mean long. Apparently an hour is too much for even the most committed Urbit fanatics. So we aim to please, so we're switching up the format. So starting this week, we're going to have two formats. One format, which is an interview, simply an interview. The other format, which is a roundup, and we'll alternate back and forth. So we're going to start this week with an interview with dachus-tiprel. So dachus-tiprel is an Uqbar engineer. He's also one of our guys based in El Salvador. He's going to be talking to you a little bit about Pyro, which is the system that he's been building for Uqbar that's for virtualizing other ships in Urbit. So that means being able to run an Urbit inside your Urbit, multiple Urbits actually. So it's sort of like a Inception, but on Urbit. I found this to be a very interesting conversation. Dachus is a great guy. And I think you're going to find it interesting too. So without further ado, here's Dachus-tiprel.
If you could go ahead and give me like just a little bit about your background, kind of like how you got into Urbit, how you found your way into this in the first place.
Right. So I was studying computer science in college, and I was sort of looking for opportunities to like exit. Like that word means like a lot in different contexts. So there's like physical exit, and people want to like build charter cities and like new countries, new cities. Then there's like digital exit with like, or it's just like financial exit with like cryptocurrencies. And that was very attractive and cool. And then people were also talking about like exit from like Web 2, which was like pretty new and interesting and seemed like both like a new frontier, but like super possible.
Yeah.
And so like,
as opposed to seasteading, is you don't need a seastead. You can
exactly. And like, I'm 23. So it's like, even getting into crypto felt like a little late. Like all the big like Solidity and like DeFi stuff had already been built.
Yeah.
And like all there's left to build is like Ponzi schemes.
Yeah.
Which I'm not against, but like, I'm also not like super interested in doing. Like, I don't think that's like a
Ponzi
worthwhile
agnostic.
Yeah. Like I'm not like, I don't think that's like best use of my time in my life.
Yeah.
And so like Urbit being like this like really possible frontier that you could build on was super attractive.
Okay. But like, just in terms of like actually how you even heard the name, I mean, it's kind of a funny, like, where do you even find
Yeah. So it was literally called like this, it was like an online, conference sort of.
Okay.
It was more like just like a Zoom meeting where people were invited.
Yeah.
And it was literally titled How to Exit.
Okay.
Right. And so they had Nick Carter there talking about cryptocurrencies. Okay. They had Dryden talking about, Praxis, like new cities. And then some guy from Urbit who I always remember his face, do not remember his name. And I only saw him at the first assembly. Okay. After that, I've never seen him again. But he was pitching Urbit.
The ghost of Urbit. Yeah.
The ghost of Urbit. And he was very, very compelling.
Okay.
So yeah, pretty quickly, like I got set up on Urbit, started talking to people, and just went from there.
Yeah. That's amazing. Okay. That's a funny, that's a funny sort of path. I was talking to Thomas and like a similar thing. You just sort of like hear the name and you kind of like find your way into things.
Well, and the fact that it was so esoteric, like when I first found Urbit, like Urbit.org was like an ocean, like it was that website, right?
Yeah,
and it's like, what is this thing? And like I just had to keep like knowing.
But do you think that like, actually like made you more compelled or less?
Right, and I think like a lot of people. For the subset they were targeting at the time, it was perfect.
Yeah.
For now, I think we've gotten like a lot bigger. Like there's like a new subset of people that we want to target. But at the time, it was like, because it really wasn't ready for anything, right? Like there's a lot of stuff needed to be built out. And so like just this like sort of like mysterious thing, it was perfect.
Yeah, it's funny because you're like, I hear that a lot. Like that's sort of, there's a little bit of the mystique that does bring people in. But it's also like, is it worth the, is it like, where's the trade, where's the balance?
Right. And so for me, it was like, I dropped out of college and like, I took a gap year, right? During the pandemic. That's what I told, so the gap year has continued on to like 3 years now. But that's what I told my parents and they were cool with that. And so I was just aggressively looking for job opportunities. Like any excuse not to go back to college was like good to me.
So it's more about exiting college, is it?
Yeah. Now that you mention it, that's, exiting college, having a good excuse and a good way to like sell it to mom and dad.
That's
they would buy it.
So did you start working for Uqbar immediately or no?
No, so it was funny. I started working on Urbit stuff. Tim, who's now my boss, was like my mentor because the foundation was running these like apprenticeship programs. So I was doing that for a bit. And then Tim basically asked me, he was like, yeah, this Urbit stuff is cool, but you want to make a lot of money. Yeah. And so I was already doing some Solidity work at the time. So I took sort of like a hiatus from Urbit to do a lot of shitcoining.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you did a little bit of Solidity stuff sort of on the side.
Exactly. Yeah, like DeFi stuff. And then that eventually fell off during the bear market. And then I called up Tim again and I was like, hey, can I have a job?
Where's that money?
yeah, exactly. And then, and he was like, yeah, when can you start? I was like, tomorrow?
Yeah.
Like, great.
That's amazing. Okay, so I mean, the thing that I wanted to talk to you about specifically, I mean, you've done actually a lot in the time that you've been on the network. but I wanted to talk specifically about Pyro. And so Pyro, I'll just give you kind of like, I'll give my attempted sort of like short version and you just correct me if I'm wrong. So it's like Pyro is a tool to virtualize a running Urbit ship. Is that probably the most basic thing? So I was thinking, can you kind of walk me through what virtualization even is? Like when someone says like a virtual computer, you hear that, like, but what does that mean?
Right. It's basically like simulations, right?
Okay.
It's sort of like Inception. Like, how do you simulate like one thing within another?
Yeah.
Right. And like you can actually like, keep doing this recursively like forever.
Okay.
Right. So if you wanted to simulate, like you have like VirtualBox for Unix or like Linux stuff. So it's like you can simulate like a whole Linux instance inside your main computer. And the benefit you get from that is that like, when I was in college, it was like, oh, you can screw around with this instance and like the rest of your computer will be fine.
Okay.
So while you're learning Unix stuff, like do whatever you want in there.
Yeah.
Like be crazy.
Yeah.
But like it will not like percolate out to the rest of your computer.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's sort of like a containment zone almost.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So the I never thought about it's like a dream within a computer within a computer.
Right. Yeah.
Basically, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's interesting that you bring up the idea that it's sort of like it's a containment zone. So it's like you can be crazy in this containment zone, right? In a way you couldn't on your normal ship or your normal computer, right?
Right, exactly. So it's like you wouldn't want to, like you never do testing on your main chip.
Yeah.
I remember actually, I think like Rabsef like was doing this and like just thought Urbit development was like supremely expensive because he had to keep breaching every time he was like screwing around with this ship. And it wasn't until later that he found out that like you can use like fake things to actually simulate.
So a ship for everyone who's listening to this is basically the term that we use for an Urbit instance, right? So it's a computer. And so what's interesting about Urbit though is like it actually is a virtual computer, right? So, and by that we mean exactly what you're saying. It runs on your MacBook on a server,
right?
But Pyro and Aqua, which is kind of like derived from, is a virtualization even within that.
Urbit.
Yeah,
and you actually get a lot of benefits from doing that. So like the sort of like normal way that you would have to like simulate multiple ships is you just spin up multiple Urbits.
Yeah,
and so for maybe like 2 ships, that's tenable. That's like possible to do. As soon as you get to like 3, 4, 5, it gets basically impossible to work with. So like if you're testing like an app like poker where the bugs would only show up at a minimum of 3 or 4 users, then you need something better than just opening like 5 different Urbits in like one, in your laptop.
Yeah.
Like it just became like totally untenable.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm assuming also, so you're talking about testing as being one of the main benefits of this kind of thing, right? Because you can also you could test things kind of in a repeatable environment, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, so it's like the ships are like, like you can basically just like tell, like your ship is just a noun. Like it's just like a struct, right? And so you basically can just like replicate that, like save what exactly like the state was, and then like replay it, reset it back to that state, and keep running more tests going through that.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, can you kind of explain why Urbit is a good environment for virtualizing this stuff versus, like you were saying before, and just maybe people don't know these tools, like VirtualBox is an obvious one where it's like, if you want to run like Linux on a Windows computer, you use a VirtualBox. So like, how is this better?
Right. So the 2 things is like speed efficiency and space efficiency. So speed efficiency, every single virtualized instance runs at full speed. So the exact same speed that you get on like the normal host ship, you get in a Pyro ship.
Okay.
Everything runs at full speed. And then there's also a lot of space efficiency because within every Urbit are like a bunch of shared files. So it's like everybody has a copy of hoon.hoon and like the compiled hoon.hoon and like all of like that stuff that lives in like the main desk, all of that can be shared. So instead of just like having this split up across like all your RAM, like on your like laptop, they all just point to the exact same file. So everybody like just has a pointer to the same hoon.hoon.
Yeah.
And so only when you like start to edit it or like mess with the noun does it start to like sort of break off.
Interesting. Okay. So that's interesting because you imagine like, trying to do something similar on a current computer, right? You're like, okay, I want to simulate 6 Linux instances on my Windows machine. It's like, you'd actually have a big problem, right? It wouldn't.
You'd have a big problem. And like, also like imagine you just want to take your normal computer, virtualize it, and start running tests within that before you actually do it like on mainnet, like within your actual like computer. And we're pretty close to just having like being able to replicate the entire state of your ship into a virtual ship.
Got it.
So you can just like basically lift all of your ship state up into this virtual one, uses no like extra space, basically no extra space, runs at the exact same speed, and now you can like actually like run experiments on that.
Interesting. So it's like, I'm trying to think about like you could have a clone. I mean, just imagine you're like clone of yourself. Some people talk about like cloning yourself and then like getting an organ from it's like sort of a similar thing. You clone
Yeah.
your ship and you can perform experiments on the ship without jeopardizing your ship, right?
Exactly.
So you can okay, well, what effect will this software have on my ship? You can clone it, run that experiment, and then
Exactly. And I don't think that's how people will use it, but it's totally an option just because like manipulating your Urbit's like subject, like all the data within your Urbit is super easy.
Yeah.
Like you can just like pull it out. It's literally just a pointer. You can just mess around with it.
Yeah. Interesting. So that like, so in terms of, I mean, right now, Uqbar, so this is kind of like part of Uqbar's general development experience suite, right? That this was kind of, you've been doing the work for that, right?
So I think what we're talking about is actually moving Pyro into like either base or like some sort of like dev desk and having it be a part of core. Because I think that's really where it belongs. And then what we did on top of that was like, we built a dev suite on top of Pyro that makes a lot of these things super easy to like access. Like you have like a whole file system that you can like peek through. One of the things you can do that's really cool is like, instead of normally to like get your computer into a specific state, what you have to do is you have to like poke it a bunch of times until it gets into the state that you want. But really, like we're working in a virtualized environment, so we can just skip all that. Be like, hey, just wipe the entire state. Here's the state that I want, and shove it in there. And so you can start your test from that point.
That's very nice. I mean, so like trying to think about in a normal testing sort of framework, like someone would use in JavaScript or something. It's like that's kind of the mock, right? You set up the test in this sort of very complicated way a lot of times. Like, like, okay, I'm testing how this website performs. You have to get that website into the correct state. Whereas like someone's just, checked out of the web store and they haven't gotten the, the confirmation page. And like you could just literally save that on your ship and then test it from there.
So it's like the difference is basically programmatic versus declarative. So it's like programmatic means that you have to like, send a bunch of like transactions basically into to get the state to like what you want. And then you save that and like repeat that down. Versus just being like, well, I know what I want the state to be. I can just write that as like a noun and then just shove it in there.
I mean, it's interesting because I think about that, like that's actually probably a more apt comparison is how people run tests like for Solidity programming, right? Like like Ganache, or I don't even know what it's called now, but like that.
That's exactly. And I remember having to do this. It was like, well, you had to have this like huge, like before each test, it would just load up the entire like fake chain with like a ton of transactions. And like, it's a huge pain to write. Like, I know roughly what I want. Can I just declare it and have that happen? No, you can't. But on Urbit, you can. It's very good for this kind of stuff.
So, okay. So that in terms of the benefits, then it would, for a developer, like just in terms of the flow, is that kind of the main thing you guys are thinking about now? It's like making it sort of the iteration time better, or what's
iteration time is going to be like orders of magnitude better. It already is today. Like even though it's like slightly unfinished, like we have a couple more core PRs, it is already much, much faster because also to boot up a fake ship, normally on like a normal laptop, that takes like 3 to 5 minutes if you're starting from a pill. And you just save it and do all this like sort of inconvenient stuff to just boot them up. We've gotten the boot time down to less than a second. Already. So that's there today. And then the next annoying thing you have to do is basically installing desks. So like to build all the agents that like you want to test, that can take, a couple minutes at max if you have like a very big set of apps that you want to test. Now what you do is you just take the apps that exist on the host ship and you can just pull those nouns out. They're already like just pre-built agents that are blank slates and throw them in. And so that is instant time. So installing a desk is O of 1.
That's very nice. Okay. So that's like kind of, and I mean, just for people who aren't familiar with what Uqbar is doing, it's like, it seems like making that developer experience just, so you're surfacing all this stuff to developers on Urbit so they know that they can do all this stuff and it's really just right there. So that's like right in the, they don't have to dig around the command line and stuff. It's just all in the IDE.
Exactly. And so like, it's very useful. Like we built it basically because we needed like our own like testnet suite, like simulator, right? And like actually like the most general like Urbit maximalist way to do this is just to simulate an entire ship within your ship. And so it turns out that like, of course it serves the purpose of like having a testnet where you need like a minimum of like 2 or 3 ships to actually like get a viable testnet running, like local testnet. But it also lets you test any arbitrary GALP at the same time.
Okay. And that would be very, very fast, I'm assuming.
Extremely fast.
Okay. Interesting.
Right.
So that's like, I mean, I just want to make sure people understand kind of like, there's especially, so Urbit, backing up, peer-to-peer network. There's a lot of unexpected things that can happen, right? When you ship something to the network. And I think this is something like, maybe people do not understand. It's like, it sounds good to be peer-to-peer, but the kind of like emergent errors that can come out of that versus just updating a website or something like that. So it's sort of like this kind of testing really is more necessary for
is
a
extremely
distributed system.
important. Yeah, because like on a centralized database, it's like you hit some weird edge case and you can go in and fix that and everything will be fine.
For everyone.
For everybody, because it's all just one database. But now, like maybe you just never run into an edge case in all your testing and all your users, and then the next guy that downloads it runs into a weird state because something happens.
Yeah.
And like you have to look at that. You have to handle that case.
Yeah.
And, like your code has to be like rock solid before you can like reach that level of confidence where you know it's not going to fuck up on anybody's ship. Period.
And that's I think one of the coolest things about the Uqbar stuff is like, you know, a lot of the development practices that we have, that people have, come implicitly from developing on centralized things, you know? And so sort of you kind of like, oh, it's hard in different ways to do it in a decentralized way. And the first time you ship something to the network and it breaks someone's ship and you're trying to like coordinate with them, you're like, oh, we have to have better tools. We have to have different processes.
Right. Exactly. And so like Pyro could like fix this pretty easily by just being like, well, send me your entire Arvo now. And, like, let me just see like what's going on. Like I can just see the exact error. You don't have this weird thing where like, oh, like can you go into like tmux? Can you like scroll up, like see like what's going on? Like debugging on a decentralized network is a huge pain. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I didn't even think about that. So you could actually have someone send you essentially a copy of their ship.
Yeah.
And say, I will look at the clone of your ship and can tell you what's wrong.
Right. Or just like a small subset of it for like privacy. Like what is the state of your app right now? Like, are you okay? Like I'm the developer. Like I need to look at this. Like I'm a doctor, you know?
Exactly.
I need to look down there.
Trust me, I'm a doctor.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a doctor of Urbit. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's like, you know, so the most obvious win here is like just directly for developers. But do you think that there is like, you know, user level things that can use virtualization like this beyond the developer experience?
So I think the main thing that like this will affect like in the real world, like outside of testing, is hosting.
Okay.
And so because you can host like multiple ships on one big ship, right? And you get all the same benefit, like you get massive benefits for like speed and for like space efficiency. And so I got estimates from guys that work at Chorus One who like do hosting. And they said that like if you had Pyro, but it was fit to actually host real ships, you could drop hosting costs to like less than $1 a month.
Yeah.
Extremely, extremely low. And scaling it up is extremely fast.
Yeah.
Basically, like, you know, it like the main issue with like setting up Urbit right now in like a hosting environment where it's like you need one Unix box per Urbit.
Even if it's a virtual Unix box, right? Like
exactly. Or whatever it will be, right? So, you know, it's a huge pain to set up.
Yeah.
So like, you know, if you just do this with like a click of a button, where it's just like, oh, you know, you're trying out Urbit, we're just gonna spin up one that's like a virtual instance. It will be like a real ship. Like it can interact with the entire network. It is real. But it lives within like an armada is what you call it, right? So it's like Urbit is made up of like ships.
Armadas,
Armada is like you have a big captain and he's able to host multiple ships for you. Yeah.
And I mean, so one thing also it's like, you know, this idea where the way hosting works now, and there's, you know, more and more elaborate ways to do it, but yeah, you basically have to spin up a new computer that is the host for that Urbit, right? And there's like always going to be trying to get information in and out of that Urbit, right? Like what's wrong with it? You're trying to like see what's wrong with it.
Right.
And so it's like, it seems like one of the benefits of running it from an Urbit is it's all just immediately inspectable from the Urbit.
Yeah. And it's also like just like the Urbit maximalist vision.
Yeah.
Because like all software, including hosting software for your Urbit, is written in Hoon.
Yeah.
Everything is Urbit.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a very maximalist vision.
And I think that's one of the implicit things behind a lot of hosting ideas is that the price per ship can go way, way down.
Yeah,
right.
Like an order of magnitude down.
Yeah, and that would mean that, you know, that could be make it a better business. It would make it more efficient.
Right, and I think like the biggest thing that I see is like, okay, it'll drop the cost for hosting providers massively, but it'll also open up, like it'll make it super easy to become like a micro hosting provider. So if I'm self-hosted, then like normally if I want to host my friend, like I want to get him on board, it's a pain. Like I have to set up a new droplet. I have to like do all this stuff with the cloud and set up a new Unix box, and it's a big pain. But if I can just like click a button and someone's like a new ship from my stars just spawned instantly and starts up, that is much, much easier.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's really cool. I didn't thought about that. So you can have like your neighborhood Urbit host basically.
Right. Exactly.
And that would be it. I mean, because you can quote unquote do that now, but it takes a lot of expertise basically.
Exactly. And like once you become like a heavier user, like you just like love Urbit, it's like, okay, time to kick you off my armada.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like one of the problems we haven't mentioned here is that Urbit is single threaded.
Yeah.
And so basically if you have like a bunch of ships running a bunch of parallel stuff, the best performance you can get is actually 1/n.
Yeah.
It's actually not good. right? But like you can basically alleviate this by, it's just like an optimization problem.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you have some high cost users, you have some low cost users. And so if someone's like using their Urbit a ton and they're constantly hitting the event loop, they need their own instance, right? You need to sort of optimize that. But you have a bunch of low cost users, throw them on one big armada. And then drop the cost dramatically.
Yeah, it's like a gym, right? The gym makes its money by the people who don't come as much to the gym. Right?
Exactly.
So it's like a simple thing. I mean, I think that was actually is kind of like was my last question for you. Is like kind of what do you think are the barriers like to this let's just talk about the hosting thing in particular. Like what's kind of like blocking that moving forward? Like what are the challenges?
Right. There? So the main thing is so you have hosting like a Pyro ship, which is like this very small core. It's like 500 lines of code, super small. Then you actually need to simulate the entire runtime. You need to rewrite all of their in Hoon to get this to work. Yeah. And so like I estimate, you know, like 6 to 12 months of like 3 engineers that are talented to get that done. So opportunities out there if anyone wants to do it. Yeah. Make a lot of money.
This is the official call for
for anybody that wants to, you know, build Armada. It's ready to go if you want to do it. But it's not even that difficult. It's just like a lot of like rote work. Like every single like little IO driver that exists like written in C, you have to rewrite all of that in Hoon. Yeah. And so right now I just have the ones that like are useful for like testing. So it's like networking. So like we have like some of the AIM stuff done. We have Bane timers, that works. We have a little bit of like Iris, so you can make HTTP requests from a virtual ship. It'll actually get proxied out to the real web or to the real internet,
that's cool.
and it will come back for real, which is very cool. We need some more work on Air, and basically just like go down the list of every single vein and get the IO of like C, like that there, written in Hoon. Okay. And we call that virtual runtime Pyro.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I didn't go into it, but it's like Aqua, which was short for aquarium, was the original thing, and then Pyro, fire and water.
We kept the Greek,
the elemental aspect.
Yeah, well, the metaphor was basically just that, like, you have an aquarium of virtual ships. You call them fish. Yeah, so you have, you know, you play around, watch them do their stuff. Whatever.
That's great. Well, this is amazing. Thank you for explaining that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if anyone else is interested in like more stuff from you, what's the best place, like both Urbit and Clearweb, to find Dachus?
So obviously on Urbit, so DM me on
dachus-tiprel, and I'll put it in the show notes.
Exactly. Okay. Twitter, I'm active on, so you can DM me there. And then I have more content written on my blog, which is also linked to my Twitter, hosted on Urbit by blog. Boom. Another app I wrote, which we're not going to talk about.
Yeah, we can talk about it a little bit later.
Yeah, but download it from Hanrat Silit dachus-tiprel.
There we go. And I'll put that all in the notes. But thank you very much, man.
Yeah,
Great
absolutely.
talking to you. Boom.
That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.